Joining me on the Food Impact podcast today, I have Dr. Emily Leeming, author of The Genius Gut, the life-changing science of eating for your second brain. Emily, welcome to the Food Impact podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I suppose the best place to start is, what justifies referring to the gut as the second brain?
Absolutely. And I love that as a starting question. So we call our gut the second brain because effectively it has its own nervous system called the enteric nervous system. And this contains lots of nerve cells like we have in our brain. We have lots of nerve cells in our brain. These are called neurons. So in the brain, we have 100 billion neurons. In the gut, we have 500 million. So still a really, really large amount, and more neurons than you would find in your spinal cord and more neurons you would find in the head of a cat. Now, this is effectively sending very kind of complex control of your gut for your digestive system. So it is having fine-tuned complex control over how your gut moves, the muscles of your gut. It is signaling to your digestive juices to be released. And it's also sensing and picking up some of the nutrients that are in your food and passing that back. Now, I'm aware that, your gut can't write poetry or solve maths equations like your brain, but it does work as an organ very independently from your brain, more independently than other organs. And I think the key connection as well, we're calling it the second brain, is that it is directly and anatomically connected with your brain. And there's this kind of very powerful relationship between your gut and brain signaling back and forth.
Do you think that this topic, this the microbiome in general, is like an underrepresented topic? I'm thinking, I've done nutrition courses in the past when I used to work as a PT and things like that. And this is a topic that was never taught. It was never even touched on. Do you feel it's an underrepresented area? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the microbiome piece in this, so I just talked about the gut and the brain connection, right? And the microbiome piece is a new piece that's come into this kind of connection pipeline. So now we talk about it as like the gut microbiota brain connection. And I totally I hear you that the microbiome hasn't been part of this kind of conversation until very recently. And that's really mostly because we haven't had the technology to really be able to explore and understand what bacteria we've got in there and what are they doing. And actually, we're still really making kind of big kind of roads and processes into understanding the other microorganisms that are also within our gut microbiome, like viruses and fungi, for example, with so much less that we know about them. So in terms of the amount of papers that have come out, it's really been the last 20 years that we've had kind of this astronomical increase. So we've gone from very limited amount of scientific papers 20 years ago to now having about 60,000, and really understanding that your gut microbiome is almost this forgotten organ, this cornerstone of health, and that it's not simply there just to help with your digestion, which it does a very good job in helping you in terms of extracting some energy and producing some vitamins and producing all these amazing metabolites. But these metabolites, these molecules, these special molecules that your gut bacteria produce, also influence the health across your body to multiple different sides, to your lungs, to your liver, to your heart, and then, of course, now your brain health. So it's a very exciting area of research currently.
Well, I suppose part of the answer to this question is the very fact that we're having this conversation to begin with. But I feel as though a lot of the public, the everyday person, they very rarely think about gut health or the microbiome. They probably haven't even heard of it. They probably don't think too much past gut health other than the sort of prebiotic yogurts they see in Tesco or something like that. Just as a quick elevator pitch, if you were to give an elevator pitch to just the everyday person that's never thought about this topic before as to why they should start taking gut health serious, what would you say to that person?
I think we've thought about gut health in the past as just, being able to go to the loo and not having any kind of digestive issues. I think it's now this shift into understanding that it's the health of the rest of your body. But I think it's also our perspective changing on kind of what health means. So I think health previously was, either you had health or then you didn't have health. You had a disease or an illness, or you were kind of, on your deathbed. And that eating healthy was just about avoiding that for as long as possible. Whereas I think really now we're recognizing and really understanding, putting emphasis on the fact that health is also how you feel right now. It's your energy, it's your mood, it's your ability to move about, it's your quickness of thinking. And I think that's really kind of important when it comes to your gut microbiome, that it's involved in all these processes. But also the key thing is that you can change it by changing what you eat. So you have this additional tool to kind of help you feel better in your day to day and enjoy life and live a long, happy, healthy life effectively, God willing.
I think in terms of nutrition for the everyday person, I think they like to have some sort of metric to look at. They like to, I think the easiest one in black and white is, am I overweight? Am I in shape? How do I feel in my body? How do I look? But in terms of gut health, then, what are some recognizable biomarkers for bad gut health and good gut health? Because there might be some people out there who look like they are the epitome of health, but may not necessarily have good gut health. What are some good indicators as to where our gut health is?
Yeah, so it's really hard to tell someone's health by looking at them. So everyone has a very different microbiome. It's unique to you as fingerprint. But in general, a few things that we know about what we think a healthy gut microbiome looks like. And what we talk about is having lots of different types of gut bacteria. So if you think about a rainforest, that kind of ecosystem, you've got shrubs, you've got vines, you've got moss on rocks. You have all these different plants living together, and they're living together kind of harmoniously, but also in a kind of slightly competitive nature, for resources, for kind of light, for water. And your gut microbiome is the same. You wouldn't want just one gut bacteria to dominate above all else, because they all do different things. You want to have lots of different types of gut bacteria, because they all produce these different special molecules which can influence your health. They can produce about 50,000 of these molecules that we call metabolites. So that's kind of one thing we talk about is, how high is your diversity of your gut microbiome is kind of a metric of your gut microbiome. When we're talking about the health of your gut, because your gut, most people point to their stomach and say, oh, that's my gut, that's my gut. The health of your gut is actually, your gut is all the way from your mouth, all the way down to the bum. So it's the entire digestive system. And a really easy kind of way, just completely free, you can do it on a daily basis or wherever you go, is to look at your poo is a really great way to tell the health of your gut. And also through that, also tell how healthy your gut microbiome is, because your gut bacteria also make up a significant component of your poo as well. So I talk about poo a lot. I'm a dietitian, I'm a microbiome scientist. And effectively what you're looking for is a brown color. You're looking to be going 3 times a day, or up to 3 times a week. So whatever is normal for you within that might be very different from one person to the next. And it's also looking at the shape and form of that poo as well. It should be a smooth sausage or a smooth sausage with cracks in it. So those are like really quick, easy ways to be able to tell what the health of your gut is without having to do anything else.
So I think by this point, everyone's probably on the same page as, this is an important subject. This is something they probably, 99.9% of people watching probably want to improve. Is it the case then of, let's say, and I'm not saying this is the case, but let's say the way that Dr. Emily Leeming looks after her gut health is, let's call that 100%, just for the purpose of this conversation. If someone is, say, at 1% conscious of their gut health, is it the case of, to make a substantial difference in their overall health and their life, do they have to go from a 1% to 100%? Or does just going from a 1% to maybe a 10%, does that have sort of life-changing, results?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any tiny, small step that you can make that is consistent and long-term you'll reap, lots of rewards in terms of your health in the long run. And I think in terms of how we know based on behavioral science, that it's much easier to actually keep up small sustainable changes than to go from 0 to hero, for example. So actually making something that works for you is probably the best way to go about it, and just kind of focus on what you find achievable. In terms of what I would advise, a big focus is, when it comes to the gut microbiome, is that we know that one of the biggest contributors to the biggest influences of your gut bacteria is what you eat. What most of the food that you eat is absorbed in your small intestine, which is a 6-meter long tube, before it reaches your large lower intestine, the home of your gut bacteria. So the things that make it through tend to be parts of food components that you're not able to digest yourself. And most of this tends to be fiber. So fiber is a type of complex carbohydrate. There's effectively the plant roughage from plant foods like fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and whole grains. And even just having a small amount of extra fiber in your day is going to have a really great impact for your gut bacteria. Your gut bacteria feed on fiber. It helps them to then produce special types of these metabolites that we really like, called short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids have anti-inflammatory effects. They help to support the health of your gut lining. So your gut lining effectively helps to get in nutrients and kind of helpful molecules from your gut into your bloodstream, but it also stops any molecules or kind of invaders getting through when they shouldn't be. And it acts in a very similar way with your blood-brain barrier as well. This is a protective fortress around your brain that, again, only lets through those helpful molecules and nutrients that your brain needs. And these short-chain fatty acids also really help to keep this really nice and strong. And when I talk about fiber, I'm just going to keep on this one for a second. I think it feels a bit kind of like, well, how much fiber? What fiber? When we talk about fiber, so let's talk about a can of chickpeas, right? So half a can of chickpeas is about 7 grams of fiber. That is associated with a 9% lower risk of heart disease, I think 6% lower risk of type 2 diabetes, and 8% lower risk of colorectal cancer for every 7 grams of that fiber that you have. If you have even a smaller amount, a third of a can, so 5 grams of fiber, that is associated with a lower risk of depression by 5%. So that's just making a small add-in to have, lots of benefits across your body.
Well, this topic of fiber has come up many times on this show over the years. One of our very good friends, and who's been on this podcast probably about 4 or 5 times, is a big name in this field. He actually wrote a bestseller called The Fiber Fueled Diet. Dr. Will Bolshevitz. I'd actually like to connect you two. He does these brilliant Instagram lives around the topic of fiber and the gut. So I'd love to connect you two. I
know well. He's a great guy. Yeah.
There we are. I don't need to connect you, but yeah, very good friend of the show. Whenever Will comes on the show, we get a lot of questions about fiber, and I think now fiber is almost becoming, in terms of a marketer's perspective, the new protein. I mean, you go to the shop now and these foods are labeled high fiber. Those are the stickers on the front of the food, similar to, protein. Sometimes you'll go down the aisle, you see a pack of chicken and it says high protein on there, as if that's, not obvious. But they seem to be doing this now with fiber. So what are people looking for then? You mentioned the chickpeas as an example. When people are going to the supermarket and they're having these foods marketed at them with high fiber, what are they looking for? Are they different types of fiber? Is they bad fiber? Is they good fiber? What are some of the things they should look out for when they're around the supermarket, around these high fiber foods?
Yeah, so fiber is, we talk about fiber as if it's one thing. There's lots of different types of fiber. So the recommendation is to have 30 grams of fiber a day, and that's for, the health of your gut. And even just having more than that would probably still very likely be a good thing. In terms of the different types of fiber, there are certain types of fiber called prebiotic fibers. Now, this effectively just means that they are specific types of fiber that your gut bacteria particularly love. particularly like to feed on, and particularly help them to make those special short chain fatty acids that can influence your health. So really, when we're talking about fiber, we really want to think about getting it from whole food sources, because all these different foods will contain a variety of different fibers. And the easiest way to try and get more fiber in is not to have to kind of log something on an app and kind of be stressing about it. Is to think, what are the key big fiber kind of heavyweight hitters that I can add in and make, are basically a regular part of your day. You add them as part of your essential shopping list. So for me, I call them the BGBGs, which is beans, grains, berries, greens, and nuts and seeds. So just for context, I think a lot of the time when we talk about fiber, everyone's immediate thought is to think about lettuce or salad. Like, oh, I've got to eat lots of salad. So salad is 1.8 grams of fiber per 100 grams. That's about a bowl of salad. That is not, it's still contributing to your fiber amounts. But if we compare that to, for example, the chickpea example, chickpeas are kind of 8-9 grams per 100 grams. That is going to be, 4 times more, if not 5 times more than your lettuce. Then we compare that with something like chia seeds, for example, 30 grams per 100 grams. Thinking about whole grains, so swapping your bread is a really easy way to kind of up your fiber intake. So pumpernickel bread, just one slice of pumpernickel bread contains 6 grams of fiber. Nuts and seeds, I am a big fan of, just it's really important for heart health. I have a jar that I keep in the corner by the kettle. Great for having as a snack, great for sprinkling onto your yogurt with berries in the morning, great for kind of toasting and putting on salads, and any dish really. And just having a handful of that every day is really great for your gut bacteria, and it's going to be really helpful in terms of getting that extra fiber in as well.
So in terms of carrying on down this fiber train then, fiber supplements, when you go to the sort of health and well-being section of a supermarket, you see a lot of these psyllium husk, things like that. Is there a place for fiber supplements, or should they be a last resort option then?
I think really in the context of the fact that, in the UK, most of us are getting only probably 65% of the fiber requirements that we should be having. So we've got this massive fiber gap between what we need to be having, the 30 grams of fiber a day, and what we're actually having, which is kind of about 18 to 20 grams of fiber a day. So ideally, we would fill that gap with whole foods, because you're going to get all those different varieties of fiber. You can go for more the prebiotic fiber vegetables, which would be asparagus, onions, garlic, beans, again, chicory, and what you could so ideally, I think it's an ideal world. You want to be getting your fiber from fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and legumes. I do think there is a place where you can take a fiber supplement if you're really feeling that you're struggling to get there. And I think it's really interesting evidence around prebiotic fiber supplements, for example, in terms of mood and cognition. So some of recent research by some colleagues at King's College London found that giving a prebiotic supplement to older adults, so this was an inulin and fructooligosaccharide blend, they found it significantly improved their scores on memory tests that are commonly used to look at kind of early stages of Alzheimer's disease. So that's, across a 3-month period. So I think that's, again, really interesting, and kind of other insights around kind of mood and kind of emotional bias as well.
Yeah, that's extremely fascinating, because especially with these supplements, I think that everyone listening to this, I'm certain will agree that this is something they would like to improve. But the reality is, people would if there was a pill out there that would give you all the benefits of, a good diet, good sleep, exercise, and it got all the benefits from those things that we can do into one pill, you could charge astronomical amounts of money for that pill. Whereas, you could go and do that stuff, but a lot of people anyway, avoid just that hard work. And so when it comes to fiber, you mentioned the breakfast, and this is one of your 10 gut brain hacks. I believe it's number 8. I really enjoyed this one because for me, I like to, well, in all areas of my life, I like to front load my day with any task that's particularly hard. It sort of sets me up for the day. So in terms of fiber intake, getting a lot of that in your breakfast, I think seems like a very sensible option, just to put you on course for the day. You talk about having a protein and fiber powered breakfast. What does that look like? What are some sort of good examples of a good breakfast that contains that sort of protein and fiber hit?
Yeah, so I'm really quite passionate about breakfast because I feel like it's been given a bad rap. And I think a lot of the context for that is that it's really hard to get, enough fiber in if you're completely skipping a meal. And we see people who are breakfast skippers in multiple countries tend to have lower intakes of fiber and other key important nutrients as well. And also, tend to then, it's kind of population-based studies where breakfast skippers tend to have lower mood, they're not as happy, they're not as able to concentrate, all these things that we think, sounds very rational, but I think we've got confused in this dialogue around breakfast. So having a fiber and a protein-rich breakfast is going to help keep you feeling full for longer, as well as feeding your gut bacteria with that fiber. And that's also going to help. That's research around that to show that you're less likely to have food cravings later in the day. So you're going to, be feeling better and able to then make choices that feel a lot easier to support your gut bacteria and support your health. And then, of course, if you want to have, cake or something, it's under your own directive, rather because you feel exhausted and tired and you've just ended up kind of falling into that. So some great starting kind of breakfast. So if I go back to that pumpernickel rye bread, again, great basis. You have your pumpernickel rye bread, you have some eggs in there. I very much go for talking about having half your plate with either fruits or vegetables or mixing up. You like to mix them up. So for breakfast, that could be like some mushrooms with some avocado, and then always thinking about that opportunity to do a kind of nut and seed sprinkle, because that's going to give you that kind of extra fiber boost. That's going to help keep you feeling full for longer, energized for longer, you feel sharp and focused, and that's going to feed your gut bacteria. If you prefer a sweet option, though, I don't know, are you a sweet or savory person?
I like a bit of both. I like to mix it up.
Yeah, I mean too. So I really like overnight oats at the moment. So I'll make it with kefir. So I can just prep in advance, and I'll grate carrot and apple into it. I'll add some cinnamon. So we know spices also are really rich in some molecules called polyphenols, which also feed your gut bacteria. Add in some chia seeds, extra fiber there, and some honey for sweetness. And that's, again, a really great way to have a very filling, fiber-fueled breakfast.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I like a bit of both. So both of those options very appealing to me. In terms of going back then to the sort of gut-brain connection, what is the communication going on there? So is it the vagus nerve that connects the two, right? So what is the information going in each direction?
Yeah, so there's multiple ways so your gut and your brain, if you're talking about, through the second brain, the enteric nervous system, are communicating through your vagus nerve, which is this kind of long kind of highway that is sending signals back and forth, up and down from your gut to your brain. When we talk about how your gut microbiome is involved with this gut-brain communication. The gut bacteria can stimulate the vagus nerve and send signals up to the brain that way. It can also produce those metabolites that I mentioned earlier, which can influence your brain. And then it also has less direct methods, like through your immune system, because we know that 70% of your immune cells are in your gut. That's very closely linked. And then also with the production of neurotransmitters and hormones. Now, I think the biggest, and I'm sure you've seen this all over social media, is that kind of slogan of 90% of serotonin is made in your gut. And I always want to put like a little asterisk afterwards and say, but, because, there needs to be a bit more context with how that's communicated. So like many of, probably most of the molecules that are in our body, they all have they have multiple different roles. They're not just doing one thing. And it's the same with serotonin. So serotonin, that is made by the gut. So 90% of serotonin is made in the gut. It is actually used by your digestive system, and it helps to kind of signal and support how your muscles and your gut moves. The reason why we're kind of skeptical about it having a very direct impact on your mood is because this kind of gut-made serotonin is too large a molecule to fit through your blood-brain barrier to reach your brain to influence your mood. Though we do think that it has an indirect effect through your immune system. So it could be kind of signaling there. But I feel like, again, there's a but. Your gut microbiome seems to actually influence the serotonin made in your brain in a different way. So if we think about that too large molecule trying to fit through the blood-brain barrier as a ready-made sofa trying to fit through the door of a small flat, and it just won't go through. So what do you need to do? You need to break down that sofa into parts, or you get kind of a flat pack sofa, and you put the parts through first, and then you build your sofa in your room. So it is the same with getting serotonin made in the brain. The gut bacteria help to get some of the building blocks that are much smaller through the blood-brain barrier so that your brain can make serotonin on site. This is particularly referring to an amino acid called tryptophan.
I'm so glad you clarified that. That was actually going to be my next question, was the difference between dopamine and serotonin in the brain versus the gut, because I've heard too many sort of armchair nutritionists talk about this, and they seem to get lost on the point.
I've had a lot of neuroscientists talking about it as well, which I find interesting.
Definitely. No, I've certainly heard that one being used all over social media. So I'm glad you clarified that there. One thing you mentioned briefly in the book that I'd love to ask you about, and this is only because a friend of mine has actually been sort of looking into this and trying to do some research and experiment with it. What do we know about the link between the microbiome and neurodiversity? Things like ADHD, autism. What do we know about that link? Is there a link? And if so, how is that link, and like how does that affect neurodiversity?
Yeah, so this is kind of a lot of the research around this, right, in terms of gut microbiome and gut brain connection. There's still this kind of black box of lots of unknowns. So I think there's a lot of really interesting research in this space. What we see is that people with ADHD and autism, for example, tend to have a very different gut microbiome from people who don't have ADHD and autism. What's difficult to kind of tease out here is whether that just happens to be, part and parcel of having ADHD or autism, or whether there's actually a kind of causal contribution, a cause and effect element to this. So with autism, this is kind of more particularly hard to kind of identify, because it tends to be that if you have autism, then you can quite often have a very restrictive diet. You tend to be quite, this what we call a picky eater. You have a very kind of bland diet, which obviously your gut bacteria don't particularly like. So because that's kind of what the difference is going on. What is interesting, that there are some kind of studies looking at probiotics and helping to just slightly alleviate some of the symptoms of autism. And again, this is not to say that you need to kind of quote unquote cure anything. It's just to give people a tool in a toolkit if they say want to help to improve their sleeping symptoms. Being able to go to sleep. So it's just providing options for people who want to have options. So there's kind of early kind of interesting evidence around that, but I think there's a lot that we still don't know yet. And I think also, we know that genetics has, quite a large, strong contributing factor to autism as well.
And another topic then, and this is becoming increasingly popular in the sort of personal development space, is sort of brain deterioration, diseases like dementia, Alzheimer's. is there much evidence, and if there is it encouraging evidence on there being a link between the gut and things like dementia, Alzheimer's?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's talk about the diseases themselves, and then I'm really interested to talk about actually cognitive decline, because I think it's never can be for many people just a natural part of aging. So with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, they both have very different microbiome profile from those people who don't have them. What's interesting is that, for example, with Parkinson's, they've done transplants of gut microbiome from Parkinson patients into mice and rats, and that they've seen that there's been some kind of Parkinson's symptoms become present. Suggesting that there potentially is a link there. And what's really interesting with that is actually that up to 80% of people with Parkinson's actually have constipation, and that constipation can appear up to 20 years before their kind of motor and cognitive symptoms. So there's this really interesting relationship between the gut and the brain. In terms of Alzheimer's disease, you're kind of 6 times more likely to have inflammatory bowel disease if you have Alzheimer's disease. So there's this kind of really interesting connection. And there's also this thought that in Alzheimer's disease, you effectively get this buildup of a misfolding protein in the brain, which is harmful. And what's kind of early evidence has suggested that perhaps this might actually start in the gut and then travel up the vagus nerve to the brain. But again, I think there's a lot to untease and unpack here, which is really interesting. I definitely think the relationship with the gut microbiome and cognition throughout the lifespan is also a really fascinating topic. So we see, if we kind of step back to kind of later life, for example, transplanting a kind of youthful mice's microbiome into a kind of older microbiome, an older mouse, was able to kind of reverse kind of brain aging and improved kind of memory in their mice. Again, mice are not humans, but I think a really interesting kind of insight into this. And we think a lot of that in later life is, again, going back to that blood-brain barrier, how strong it is, and how the gut microbiome can help support that. And also its kind of close interaction with the immune system. We know that obviously excess inflammation can be harmful. So that kind of, is a kind of key factor. But we also see this all the way up to, from early life, mice that are born without a microbiome, they have a smaller hippocampus. Effectively, this is your part of your brain, which is involved in learning and memory. I call it the librarian in my book. And then there's kind of multiple other kind of relationships that we see kind of in later life. So, as you are a child and a teenager, we see that your gut microbiome, certain species seem to be related to the size of your brain, at different parts of your brain. And also your kind of cognitive abilities, your motor abilities, so being able to pick up balls, for example, and play toys, and also your communication abilities. There seems to be a relationship with your gut microbiome. And even all the way up to kind of 26 years old. So your brain develops from 0 up until 25. You're still pruning different connections in later life at 25. And at 26 years old, we see this relationship between your kind of brain performance and certain gut bacteria in kind of observational studies.
Wow. Well, I think we've done a very good job of convincing anyone listening and watching today why they should take this topic serious. I'm sure everyone listening right now, wants to go away and do something about this. Now, in with everything in life, there's a place for things in balance and in moderation. But are there any Dr. Emily Leeming's gut health red flags? Is there anything that instantly raises a red flag, maybe in our diet or a habit, or what are some of those red flags, if there are any?
I'd say there's 2 red flags in my book. First one may not be what anyone's expecting, but I think having rules and, feeling like you've got to have a perfect diet and, being terrified to eat a food because you think it's kind of quote unquote bad for you, I think is just not really helpful at all. Having a slice of cake occasionally is going to do absolutely nothing to the health of your gut microbiome or the health of the rest of your body. It's just going to be something that you enjoy and you should enjoy and move on. So for me, I'm really big on focusing on the things that you can add in rather than what you can take away. I do want to caveat though with my second red flag, which is actually trying to avoid excess unnecessary antibiotics if you can. So antibiotics are a life-saving medication and you absolutely should take them if you're prescribed them. But there are cases where, you can just be, some people kind of ask for antibiotics when they're not necessarily necessary for your health. So a good example for this is kind of viral infections, like having a cough. That is actually not going to do, your antibiotics aren't going to do anything for that. And so what happens with antibiotics is that they don't just target the bad bacteria. If they're broad spectrum antibiotics, they'll also have an impact on your kind of healthy or kind of harmless gut bacteria. And that can last up to 6 months afterwards.
One that pops to mind, and you may be able to expand on this or disagree, but one I see everywhere in this topic, when anyone's talking about gut health, the red flag everyone seems to talk about is processed foods. Is that justified, or is that something that's been turned into sort of a boogeyman? What's your view on processed foods?
I think it is a trendy new term that isn't necessarily talked about accurately in kind of the public according to what the science actually says. I think it's become this very sexy topic that it's very easy to kind of, put a stamp on and say this is bad, this is terrible for you. I think there's a lot more nuance to that. I think there is with science, which is why I love science. So because it's, usually it's not so simple as things being black and white. So I think in if we look at kind of big picture, we know that foods that tend to be ultra processed tend to also be low in fiber and low in nutrients. So for me, quite a lot of the research is really a proxy for the fact that they just happen to be low in nutrients foods, rather than it actually being about the kind of processing or the additives and the emulsifiers. Of course, that is something that we need to be thinking about and understanding more in terms of research. When it comes to your gut microbiome with emulsifiers, it really, and with additives as well, it really seems to depend more on the type of emulsifier and additive that you're having, how often you're having it, and also what dose you're having it at. So, for example, we know that if you're having a large amount of emulsifiers across a year, that's been shown to kind of raise levels of kind of inflammation. But actually, in a study where they effectively looked at 20 different emulsifiers and they modeled them in kind of fake human guts. So these fake human guts are a really great way to look at how your digestive system works. And what they found, there were two key emulsifiers that had a significant detrimental effect on your gut microbiome and your inflammation. And this was carboxymethyl cellulose and polysorbate 80. So that sounds quite terrifying, right? But I think when we actually think about how often we find these emulsifiers in British food, there was a survey of over 6,000 emulsifier containing foods in the UK. And they found that carboxymethyl cellulose was only present in 1.4% of them. And polysorbate 80 was only present in 0.06%. And actually, the most commonly used emulsifier, lecithin, was shown to not have a detrimental impact on, or any negligible in any impact on the gut microbiome. So I think we've got to kind of just, sort of this kind of broad sweeping statements. And I think, again, we need more research to really fully understand, what's what. But for me, it's really interesting. And I think when we look and break down at some of the research where we look at the subcategories of different types of ultra processed foods, we actually see that there are some food groups that are actually good for us, even though they come under this kind of ultra processed food banner. And an example for that is bread and cereal products. Ultra processed bread and cereal products were found to be protective against having more than one type of disease. And the researchers thought this was because of fiber.
Wow, I think that's a really important point you've made there, because nuance doesn't tend to be the strong suit of, the armchair scientist out there. And as you mentioned, it is, a term, processed foods. It is quite like a sexy label that people can just zone in on, and it makes them sound like they know what they're talking about a lot of the time, I find, on these sort of social media influencers. So that's fantastic. And I think a lot of people will be encouraged by what you've spoke about by there. I'd love to be able to get to two more of your gut brain hacks. Number 4, you say opt for a daily ferment. Why, and what are some examples of those, and the difference between live and dead?
Yeah, I think that was, again, so let's say fermented foods are foods that have been kind of acted upon by kind of bacteria and yeast, and it effectively breaks down some of the starches and sugars. And so when you eat, what were the difference between a live and what I've kind of quoted as a dead ferment, which sounds quite harsh terms now I'm saying out loud, is that a kind of a dead ferment is something like sourdough, where effectively the dough is cooked and therefore that heat then kills that bacteria. But that is still having an effect on your health, because the action of those microbes while it was fermenting the dough is helping to make some of those nutrients more accessible. It's breaking down some of those sugars, so it's making the glycemic index slightly lower. And also, we think that even though the bacteria aren't alive, there's kind of early thought now that those are still having an impact on your gut microbiome and helping to kind of support your immune system in some shape or format as well. So that's in comparison to what we would call kind of quote unquote a live ferment, where you're eating the food that still has that kind of live microorganism in it, that live bacteria. So for an example for that would be kefir. So in terms of how many of these ferments you're recommended to have a day, there's a study that looked and found that having 6 fermented foods a day it basically increased their gut microbiome diversity and lowered their inflammation. Like, I feel that as a very intimidating number. So that's why I kind of recommend it, like, have a daily ferment, have again what works for you that fits in there. And I think it's also broadening that viewpoint of what a fermented food is. It's not just about having, kefir or kimchi or kraut. If you were having 6 servings of kimchi, I would feel sorry for anybody. Although, I feel like 1 or 2 would be delicious. So things that also count are kind of yogurt, cheese. Even if it's unpasteurized or pasteurized, it still counts, because when you make cheese, you have to add microbes to it to make it into the cheese and give it the flavor. Surprisingly, olives, so kind of raw olives that you find in the fridge section, so not in a jar, are also a fermented food. Cottage cheese. So if you think like a really easy snack, for example, could be a rye cracker or an oat cake with some cheese, and then you can use some kind of fermented veggies, for example, as a kind of relish on top. Or you can stir in your kimchi into stir-fried rice and have that with chicken and some veggies. And then if you're having your breakfast in the morning, have your yogurt. You can add in some extra kefir then as well. Or I actually really like adding kefir into dressings, salad dressings, because it gives that really nice kind of tangy creaminess as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you gave the but when talking about sourdough, because I've had a long love affair with sourdough. I'm a super fan. So when we were talking about the dead, then I started to feel a little bit sad. But I'm glad you qualified that one for me.
Dead, but still.
Yeah, brilliant. Before we start to wind down, I want to talk about chocolate. Everyone out there, well, most people love chocolate. They probably get excited when I've mentioned it now in this context. But dark chocolate. Why, and again, this is a food I see a lot of people talking about on social media. Why opt for dark chocolate, and what percentage exactly are we looking for? Is it somewhere about 85? That might be where people start to get a little bit less excited when we're talking about chocolate, but is that the sort of ballpark we're looking for? And ultimately, why is it a good option?
So I think I'm a big fan of having something sweet. And I think there's really understanding that, from the research, that if you cut out chocolate, then you then end up, when you do have it, having twice as much. And I think we've all, at some point in our lives, really, really wanted something, and then it just felt wildly out of control afterwards. So for me, it's about how can we bring that food in and make a food that we love something that's more part of our everyday. So dark chocolate is a really great, easy way to do that. So there's really interesting research. There was a study that looked at 85% dark chocolate and found that it helped to improve the participants' mood, but also those changes in mood were also related to changes in their gut bacteria. So why might dark chocolate influence your gut bacteria? Now, really surprisingly for many people, dark chocolate is actually surprisingly high in fibre. So it's about 11 grams per 100 grams. But it's also a really potent source of polyphenols. And I briefly mentioned polyphenols earlier, but effectively, they're a group of antioxidants that give fruits and vegetables their colour. And they're also very rich in coffee and tea and chocolate. And these polyphenols also feed your bacteria to produce those special metabolites. So we're thinking that likely there's kind of this dual action of them both on your gut bacteria and your mood. But I think I really like, so as in the book, I say, if you find the dark chocolate 85%, it is quite punchy, right? It is quite like a punchy flavor. I'm like, make that your extra 5 grams of fiber by adding in some dried fruit. So I really like to have dried apricots with it, a handful of nuts. You can have some strawberries, some raspberries. That can really effectively give you 5 grams of fiber, and you're getting that kind of sweet after lunch kind of hit that we all have and like.
Amazing. Interesting. You mentioned polyphenols. About 3 years ago, after I interviewed a quite popular but somewhat controversial doctor who's obsessed with polyphenols, for some reason, every July, I think is some National Polyphenol Day, he randomly sends me this package to my house of shot glasses and polyphenol oil. Didn't ask for them, but they turn up every year. I think I'm due one now. It's probably this time of year. But yeah, dark chocolate sounds like a much better option than downing shots of polyphenol oil. So brilliant. So as we start to wind down now, 2 questions I have for you. The first one, what is one thing that you wish the average day person, that everybody understood about the gut?
I think it's this two-way connection, and very much that it goes both ways. So yes, what you feed your gut can influence your mood and your brain power, your memory, your cognition, but also your brain also has an impact on your gut downwards as well. So stress is a key one. And I think, having stressing about a perfect diet, for example, that is having a detrimental impact on your gut bacteria. So I kind of say, yes, let's try and add in all these different things, but let's enjoy our day to day. Let's recognize that food is also delicious. My first career was as a chef, so I'm very passionate about flavor, about, sitting down, having a meal if you can, or kind of going out for dinner with someone. And really recognizing that there is so much more to food than just nutrients alone. And that, having an occasional slice of cake or a biscuit or some ice cream is, all part of a balance of a healthy diet.
Amazing. Well, I think we've done a fantastic job of talking about this topic today. I really appreciate you bringing all this insight, and all this is expanded on very, very brilliantly in the book. So I encourage everyone out there to grab a copy of the book. I'll leave all the relevant links in the description below for everyone to go and check out Genius Gut. Before we give people direction to your social media, let them know where they can connect with you and alike. The final question we ask on this show, we ask to everybody, whether you're a Hollywood actor or a musician or a microbiome scientist, we always finish with the same question. And that is, right now, for Dr. Emily Leeming, what makes life worth living?
It is standing outside in the morning and going for a walk and just appreciating the fresh air and nature. I grew up in the countryside, so for me, a dose of nature every single day is chef's kiss. It's what makes my heart sing. So yeah.
Brilliant. Sounds like some fantastic advice. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. As I mentioned there, let people know where, first of all, they can check out the book, where's the best place for them to go to. And if they want to hear more from you and connect with you, where are the best places we can send them to? Your website, your social media, let them know.
Yeah, so my website is www.emilyleeming.com. And then my social media is Dr. Emily Leeming. I'm actually more active on Substack, which is effectively you get a free weekly newsletter on the gut-brain connection into your inbox. And my Substack is called Second Brain. And then my book, Genius Gut, is available on Amazon, and it is coming out on the 25th in a few days' time. So I'm very excited. So please, do pick up a copy, and I'm excited to hear what you think.
Amazing. Well, as I mentioned, I'll leave all the relevant links below for this book. And shout out to whoever designed your cover, by the way. It's a brilliant book cover. I love it.
I keep saying that. I keep posting saying this person needs a raise.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Definitely.
So
I'll echo that.
Gut and a brain.
It's amazing. Well, I'll leave those links to your social media, your website, the book, and the Substack. But Dr. Emily Leeming, thank you so much for joining me on the Freedom Pack podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much for having me.